It can be really, really hard to plan for retirement. We don't know how much money we're going to need in the future. There's so many things outside of our control, but using our current expenses and our current sort of situation and desired lifestyle can really, really give us a good insight into how much we'll need in retirement. Over 15 years ago, my husband and I like to say we stumbled into early retirement, and we learned some things about being in quote unquote retirement that I'm going to share with you in this video that can really, really affect how much you need in retirement. So I want to share these with you so that in your retirement planning, you can consider these factors and make adjustments if you need to do so. Hi, I'm Camille Gaines here and on my website, retirecertain.com. I write about and talk about information that will help proactive investors and individuals create the life that they want and be able to pay for it. So the very first thing I want to share with you is that you are paying for your expenses with after-tax dollars. Now, it's easy to forget this. So when you're looking at your retirement plan and sort of figuring out how much do we need to retire and how much are we going to spend and are we going to cut expenses and all that, which we'll go into, one of the things that's so easy to forget is that you are paying for everything with after-tax dollars. The reason we forget about this is because when we're employed, that money, our tax money for federal taxes, is taken right out of our check, used to be checks, now our payments that we get. So it's less on our mind, and we forget. Being an entrepreneur and having stumbled into early retirement years ago, it really shifted the way we think, and it will for you too when you retire. So you make X amount of money, you get X amount of income, but then you have to pay taxes with that. So it's super, super important to add on a pretty big chunk onto your expenses when you're thinking about how you're going to pay for your retirement or how much money you need to live in retirement. Now, of course, this varies greatly depending on how your accounts are structured, whether you have retirement accounts that are funded with pre-tax or after-tax money, and how old you are when you retire, and whether you have state taxes and what type of income you're getting. It really, really varies. And I always say here in my work with my clients, there's no such thing as a cookie cutter plan. There's only you and your own situation, which is going to be very, very unique, and what works. So your taxes are going to vary. Nevertheless, almost everyone pays some taxes on that money that is funding their lifestyle in retirement. So what you'll want to do is make sure you factor that in when you're thinking about doing that formula, how much money you need to retire. This is just one of the many reasons that I like to sprinkle in one or two alternative income generating assets, because those generally have tax benefits, things like real estate or now even online businesses that more and more retirees are buying. So think about and remember to include those taxes, and think about how you can make them lower after you take a look at them. The very next factor that's going to affect how much money you need to save for retirement is something that's also overlooked a lot of the time, and that is how much your overlooked expenses are. Let me tell you what I mean by this, and this really hit us because we realized, we said, great, okay, we're spending this much and we've got this much monthly income, but then at the end of the year, we didn't accumulate as much money as we thought that we would based on our retirement income, which comes from various sources. And retirement for me, by the way, is doing what you want to do when you want to do it and being able to pay for it. So what I'm talking about with this is things like property taxes, things like those big expenses that we have with our home that are above the deductible. Things like home improvements, like a new air conditioner recently cost us $20,000. those are big expenses. And we think about our monthly expenses because that's just sort of how it works. We have the income, expenses go out. We do that for decades, right? When we're working, when we're living. And those annual expenses, we forget about them when we're equating how much money we're going to live in retirement to our expenses. So it's super easy to forget. So make sure that you consider anything like that you incur on an annual basis. What I like to do is just a spreadsheet for my bank. Most of you probably use online apps. I'm a bit of a nerd. I like spreadsheets. And I just look at it and I see those annual expenses. And when I track our cash flow, I also make a note of those. So just stay on top of it. Whatever works for you in keeping track of this or seeing how much it is, do it, but don't forget about it, whatever you do. And one more point, remember that money's got to be paid with after-tax dollars. So it's money you make and then you pay taxes on it, and then it's what's left that goes toward all your expenses, including those unusual and often very, very expensive expenses that we have. And even on random things like root canals or crowns or expensive dental or medical expenses that aren't covered under our insurance. So make sure that you remember that. Okay, then the very next thing I want to mention is, this is really kind of obvious, but we can forget it. That's our fixed expenses. This is why so many people like to avoid debt as they go into retirement, because your mortgage is a fixed expense. I personally am not anti-debt, particularly because interest rates are lower than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And my first loan to buy a car when I didn't have enough money saved, one of the few cars that I financed, was almost 10%. So with low interest rates, I'm not anti-debt. I can foresee interest rates, they already are, higher than our recently refinanced mortgage. So I don't have a problem with debt, but a lot of people do. And it is a fixed expense, so it does increase your risk. So again, no cookie cutter formulas here. This is what I do. It may be completely different from what works for you and what you need to be at peace with your money. So the lower your fixed expenses are, the less money you need to retire, obviously. All right, the very next thing I want to mention that really affects how much money you need to save for retirement is your investment return. Okay, so let's say that you have a goal of $2 million and you already have $1.2 million saved. Let's further say that you want to retire in 5 years. I'm going to glance at my notes here to make sure I give you the exact amounts on this. So let's say that this money has been growing for about 10% a year, because at the time the markets have been high, investments have been favorable for investors. And let me just say, for most investors in almost anything, honestly, but that may have changed by the time you're seeing this video. But let's just say that you've done well and your returns have been about 10% on a diversified portfolio. Now, you've been getting this 10%, but you've gotten worried about having too much risk as you head into retirement. So you've decided to increase your portfolio holdings in cash and bonds to lower your risk a bit. So you're thinking, well, maybe I'll get about 7% going forward. I know that 7% might seem low, but let's remember the entire first 2000s decade had an average annualized return of negative almost 1%, okay, 0.92, so negative, almost. So let's think back and look at history and know that history repeats itself, a little bit different, but the same things happen over and over for different reasons and in different forms, okay? So let's remember that that was a negative return for a really long period of time. So let's say that you were getting 10%, and you're kind of thinking, because you raised cash in your portfolio and or bonds, you're going to get about 7% going forward. Now let me look at my notes here. At 7%, the $1,200,000 will grow to over $1,700,000 in 5 years when you want to retire, okay? But this is about what if you could increase that just a little bit. So let's take a look and say that you were able to increase your investment return to about 9%, which is still reasonable. That money, that $1.2 million, would grow to over, well, almost around $1,879,000 in those 5 years. So you can see what a huge difference that 2% investment return makes. Now, you may be thinking, oh, well, easier said than done, right? But I've worked with some clients that are paying so much in wealth management fees that simply by reducing the wealth management fees, and there's the 2%. A lot of people don't realize how much they're paying, particularly if they're in some sort of structured account, or, well, there are just a lot of scenarios that I won't go into, but see how much, first dig around there and see if you could come up with another 0.5%, 1%, maybe even 2% return, or I like to say optimize your capital. Invest in the best way possible within the acceptable risk for you. And most people I find aren't really doing that. So if you can increase that return 1%, 2%, it can have a meaningful impact without really much work, any work, if you're just investing in paper assets like stocks and bonds. Now, if you're going to do something like real estate, different story, a little more effort there. But how can you increase those investment returns? And that will significantly impact the amount of money you need for retirement. Now, that example I gave was leading up to retirement. So it's a little, different because this video is really about things that will affect how much you need in retirement. But then in retirement, your money's going to be invested as well. So this is a huge factor. All these things are huge factors leading up to retirement and living in retirement when you have your money invested. The fifth factor that will have a huge impact on how much money you need to retire is if you can create an extra income stream or two in retirement. This is outside of your main investment account. For example, you may have dividend income in your investment account. But if you're planning on making retirement withdrawals, which most people are following that sort of standard 4% withdrawal rule, then this is outside of that, okay? Now, let me just equate this for you. So if you're able to make an extra $1,700 a month income, and there's dozens of ways you can do that now. Anything from online business, sitting here like me, talking with videos and getting paid for ads, some consulting work. You could work part-time for another company. You could outsource your skills on something like Upwork. We live in a time of incredible opportunity. So there's so many ways you could do that. Let's say you do, and you've got an extra $1,700 a month income. That's like you've saved an extra $500,000. Let me tell you where I got that. The 4% rule, if you were withdrawing 4%, which is the rule, on $500,000, that would equate to about $1,700 a month. So it's easier, in my opinion, to get that extra income stream for $1,700, especially with something like outsourcing on Upwork, than it is to save another $500,000. That's a lot of work for most people. So think about how you can create an extra income stream of some sort. And I like to work with my clients and figure out what works for them. I always get comments here, oh, not real estate, I hate real estate, so much work, this, that, this is about you and what works for you. It may be that you increase your investment skills and you get a higher return like I was just talking about. It may be you do consulting from something you learned in a long career. It may be that you outsource your skills that you learned in your career. There's so many different things you can do. So there is a way to make that happen, and it's easier, in my opinion, than saving another $500,000. So look at everything you have, all these factors, and I like to tell clients sort of look at, it's like pieces of a puzzle, and they all fit together in a way that supports and aligns with your assets, your skills, what you like doing. It all works together to fund the desired lifestyle that you want for life so that you can retire certain.